Hello there. As you will have seen by now, I played through the Crooked Man on my channel to reinvigorate my love for horror games again, and better yet, display the games I appreciate, building a foundation for my gruesome obsession with RPG Maker games in general. Of course, I never played them myself. I had the likes of Cryotic to drag me through it until I was able to play it on my own time or migrate to another channel after he got the boot, for obvious reasons. For those who haven't watched the playthrough, I advise you do so in order to get the full experience before listening to my own breakdown, but I understand if you don't have 3 hours to invest, so I'll break it down like I did in the last video and then provide my review afterwards. You can always check the chapters for where things are after all. The story begins with our protagonist, David Hoover, moving into a new home as he tries to get comfortable despite the current hardships that have begun to encroach on his normal life. Just outside his door, his best friend Paul and his wife Marion are unable to sit easy with how they are trying to help him, but have little choice and leave him alone for the night. The Crooked Man has no doubt started to grow more intent with his hauntings as David's life has already grown exceptionally difficult, though it will get considerably worse. By the next morning, David is off to visit his mother, who is in the hospital, with no real illness being given yet, but it is clearly affecting her memories, as when he arrives there is initial confusion from her. She barely recognizes her son until he is forced out due to her prior outbursts, though a doctor is there to reinforce the idea David should visit more often. Once he is home, the hauntings grow all too intense for David, as these weird notes begin turning up, sharing clues, or the same paper quality, or from the same journal, strange enough. It gets to a point, however, where he must flee and spend the night at Paul's home instead. This ends the prologue, as David leaves for the hotel he had found an address for. It is quickly turning dark by the time David arrives at Hotel Ruhenheim, but he is given nearly free roam for the entire hotel, with doors either sealed shut or locked in need of a key to open up. This doesn't stop him. He searches high and low for this old tenant so he can finally get some answers. Originally, he finds himself getting excited upon hearing a set of footsteps echoing through the building, but upon closer inspection, it's a girl in her late teens, no doubt. The first encounter is rocky, but David learns her name is Sissi, and she too is looking for something that meant plenty, as it held the memories between her former lover and herself. He agrees to keep an eye out, and they split paths again for now. As if things weren't hard enough, though, a new apparition is freed to further trouble David, as a Crooked Man rises from the depths of the cellar to torment him, even after he thinks it is sealed beneath the floor for good. As more of the building is unlocked, more notes are gathered, and time spent with Sissi tells a message of how David lost his former love interest. His passive nature felt less genuine, and with no opposing point of view, it became hard to trust his word, as he spoke not from the heart or mind. He was cowardly, in a sense. This comes to a halt, though, as he confronts this monster after it traps Sissi in the ballroom, after it had already harassed David to no end, like a beast trying to pin its prey. With enough grit, the man can walk free to comfort the girl who had fled to return the box he had found moments prior to her capture. He reaffirms that being sentimental and a sissy isn't all too bad, as if we were to discard our memories, then we haven't learned from our experiences, and it becomes even harder to let go. Sissi is grateful for having David open her eyes to such a truth, before also opening the box itself with something for him inside. Another address, another place to track down. With a kiss on the cheek, they both part ways as the first chapter comes to an end. The sky is already blackened like char when David enters into Julius Stone Law School in hopes of finding the former tenant, but instead finds a majority of the building locked off again. Seems like they didn't want any trespassers staying long, considering demolition was any day now. This doesn't stop him from exploring, only for him to be confronted this time as one of the former students pushes him down the stairs. The guy introduces himself as D, since he won't give up his real name to a shady fella, before trudging off again. David thinks nothing of this, only for an unexpected face to block his path again. The Crooked Man. It seems physically impossible for that thing to be all the way out here after driving so far, but yet it was just as eager to get him, just like at the hotel. Wasting little time, David outsmarts the monster and locks it in one of the professor's rooms before going to find D, if not to get him to leave, then to warn him at least. Eventually, David enters into the lecture halls and is able to find D to chat with him again, but to his dismay, Healer remains and calls him crazy, a harsher version of how Sissi fought against the idea back at the hotel, but the two persist in their endeavours as such. Though it isn't long until after a couple more notes, the Crooked Man gets a hold of David when he least expects an attack. Being choked till he passed out, he finally awakens, only to find a better place to fall asleep instead, as his body is reaching its limit from all the exploring he has done, as if the mental struggles weren't over. David is mocked by a technical spirit that taunts him with his past and how he betrayed his whole school. Fueled by rage, the laptop is broken with a yell as D comes rushing, trying to urge David to rest further, but when unsuccessful, just hands him an energy drink instead. Before parting again, D makes a request of having his professor's door opened if able for notes. David obliges, seeing a turn of heart in the former student now. The only thing is that the Crooked Man is now free again to cause torment, and in his pursuit, locks up the younger man within the basement room, where gas is constantly spilling in. David is there to help, only for it to happen to him as well, now, but with his wits. Pulls them through as he busts through a cracked wall before ascending the elevator shaft to freedom. They are briefly safe, as D is laid to recover from the poisoning, whilst his savior gets ready to leave. The trail is dead, and things are too dangerous for them both. D notices something fall from David's back pocket as he leaves, and the news breaks him as he reads. There had been something written in his professor's journal, but it wasn't notes, just a page of how he detested the students' unwavering ignorance to give up despite them getting nowhere. Upset, he dashes past David and to try to cope alone, but the man follows close behind. David began rattling off about how unfit D is for the lawyer dream, but also begins to understand as he too had lost out on his own dream job. Being colourblind meant his job as pilot was out the window, but he had faked it all the way until then. Sure, he chased that dream, but he isn't all too sad about missing it due to the things he still has around himself. He just doesn't want the boy to be trapped in an unachievable dream, only to realise he's too late. While reflecting, D promises that the next attempt will be his last. Then it's over for good. All is well. Time to leave. Oh, the Crooked Man has found them once more, and so David beats him down once again, hoping for the creature's demise. Once outside with D, a drink is promised, an address is given, and the second chapter comes to an end. It is midnight outside, and not a spirit dare threaten its quiet now, lest it be far. As such, it's what awakens David from his slumber, as it seems to be Shirley no less. Once out of his sleepy daze, he enters the hospital to see if the former tenant is lingering around here instead, but after digging around, he finds no traces of anyone, besides the shadows coiling into figures, only to vanish in an instant. The silence hanging over the hospital is shattered when a child sings a soft melody, waiting for his mother's return, though is met with David instead. The boy is reluctant to speak until David begins introducing himself, and they end up connecting over baseball as a result of that. As expected, even without the monster, David wants the boy, known as Fluffy, out of here sharpish, but he refuses to until his mother returns to collect him. Despite his efforts, Fluffy runs off to find his mother. David plods along to open the once closed off area of the hospital where power was needed. It doesn't take long to reunite with the wandering child, though, as he meanders around the bottom floor, only to be tricked into following David as he plays into the boy's confidence. They spend time exploring, opening locked doors with acid and gathering strange block pieces for a wooden puzzle. Everything is running smoothly until Fluffy needs a break to empty the tank, which is when, even here, the crooked man follows. It doesn't take much for David to break a hole through the wall and comfort him as the monster vanishes away for the time being, only to be found eating an embryo across the way. This thing seemed to have a preference for Fluffy, as David is an afterthought left behind in the crooked man's path until he tracks him down again to save the child. David has sustained quite the pummeling from the creature now, but persists onward with a revolver by his side once a safe is opened. That matters little if he can't keep Fluffy from panicking though, as another outburst with the monster sends them all running for the roof. Once under the moon's light, David makes sure to riddle the creature with holes whilst avoiding Fluffy before shoving him off the building for good. Nothing should survive such an encounter. Just as it is time to leave, David notices a turn in Fluffy's attitude, as the boy is agitated and heartbroken when he realises his mother has given up on him. She isn't coming back for him. David goes to follow, but is stopped by a vision. These have been commonplace now, as they kept coming at him wherever he went, but when he came to, this time, there was nothing but himself. It would be pointless to stick around, so he attempts to leave the hospital, but someone is crying. It is coming from the morgue. Perhaps it is Fluffy's mother at last. He approaches, only to be confronted by his mother, who stands cladded by shadows spouting words to break his mind. Just like years prior, David snaps and grips tight around his mother's throat so life is drained from her spectral body. This has happened prior, and the reminder of such an event causes him to stumble backwards until screaming into the void around himself. Chapter 3 ends here. The buzzing of a phone breaks through the darkness as David's friends stand by, burning with worry as to what has become of their friend. Amongst his attempts to contact David, Paul begins to spill about what the room was a bad idea. No specifics, but it upsets Marion, considering it is just like when he begins seeing things. However, it isn't long until he is able to establish a connection and attains David's location despite him being so far out. The pair of them rush out to the hospital. It seems they aren't alone with David, as those who walked with the haunted man reappear to guide Paul. Such guidance is hard to follow for those who can't see, and as such, Marion finds this to be some joke, so Paul sends her back to the car to wait. Things were looking dicey here, and danger was likely on the horizon. Upon reaching the rooftop, the two best friends finally came face to face again. David was trapped at the edge with the crooked man coiling his influence around his mind and a gun at the temple. When words seemed to matter little in changing the other's mind, Paul struck out at David to wrestle him to the ground, casting the crooked shadow aside for now. Once back in control, the two begin to chatter as to why this is all happening. The deep dive into how the monster despises David but longs for his help, the people who have emerged in these ruined environments, and ultimately, well, this is just a prolonged method of recovery. The rustling of paper draws in David's attention. It seems to be the last stop on his trip to find this mystery man. With parting words of reassurance, the two go their separate ways for now. The process of healing starts as this chapter ends. Dawn is erupting over the buildings as the sun's glow grants the residents below a comforting warmth. David stands opposite the house of the former tenant. The man approaches during his morning walk. The stranger is native to the area as he rattles off about how the house was a wonderful piece owned by Mrs. McGahan until it was left in her son's hands where it withered from a lack of care. Despite his best wishes, the building remains unsold or rented out. David has gathered enough information as the man continues on whilst he enters the building. It's a mess. Everything is left in disrepair and rot The interior is broken apart like an animal ran through it. Within a bedroom, there is a black notebook to be found, with a roll matching the numerous notes David had gathered throughout his adventure. Once all combined together again, the name on the front catches his attention. Duke MacGahan was the one he had been chasing all along, but now it was time to confront the Crooked Man once more, finally putting to rest these demons he ran from. Revolver in hand, David weakens the Crooked Man till he's a blubbering mess on the ground, only to be dismissed eternally by the tormented man's final words to be gone. All his trouble was over, and upstairs David found Duke's corpse as it hung in the sunlight. They both could be at peace at last now. The story of our protagonist is bittersweet. David returns home after his endeavours to tell the story of his travels, only to be interrupted by a call from the hospital. Paul hands off his motorcycle so David can get there quickly. He's able to give the go-ahead to remove the tumour in his mother's head. Everything goes as planned, and Mrs. Hoover awakens to find David lingering with worry pouring from his expression. Once they both come to terms with how they acted during the time of her illness, she asks for one more thing, a glass of water. The task is easy, but it was no more than a cover, so David wouldn't be present long enough for her to pass. A funeral is held not long after, but he is somewhat at ease after his final talk to her death. Paul is there to comfort him until a visitor arrives. It's Shirley. A short protest is held until the couple leave, allowing for the former lovers to rekindle over lost time and give their relationship another chance. There is but one more thing that David must do, though, as he approaches Duke's grave and places a box of cigarettes for the fallen man. From there on out, David is free from his cage to enjoy the life he now has. So that was The Crooked Man. Even after all these years, I was still able to find the scares effective and the plot to be just as endearing as it had always been. Though there are a couple things I took note of when playing. I'll start with the bad and move to the good. First off, the sound of the Crooked Man, no doubt, deafened me far easier than I expected, as I had to turn down the sound whenever he first attacks or roars at David, which ultimately becomes a bit grating over time. This kind of links in with my next criticism, which is the dead air granted by a lack of soundtrack, since in the school you're constantly greeted by gailing wind, which makes me feel like I'm exploring a mountain's ruins instead of the intended location. I think overall the chapter involving the school is the weakest part of the story, due to the building feeling more empty than abandoned, since everything is in near working order. There aren't any signs of decay, and the bloody computers are left behind as well. It didn't even need to be major details that changed anything. Just throw in some broken windows, knock some books off their shelf, perhaps even add some creaking into the ambience, and you're golden. There was also a glitch that happens whenever you kill Fluffy and the Crooked Man in the same shot, which will effectively freeze your game until you reset. It isn't too much of a problem, and I can see it being a bit of a hard fix, but by the third time I was getting agitated by all the screaming. On the other hand, I could be sat here singing my praises for the game all day, as the artwork holds up to capture this somewhat old theme to go with the game and continues to stand out even to this day with the other installments. The story itself is just as compelling too, as it follows David trying to find answers and getting ones he didn't realise he needed, whether it was coming to terms with things whilst accompanying Sissi, or accepting the fact that he is happy with his current living affairs, even if it doesn't coincide with his dream to become a pilot. Even the side characters also have their strengths too, them being memorable for fighting for or against David as he struggled on. Even Shirley's brief appearances helped expand upon his past or road to recovery after the passing of his mother. It should be noted that it leaves things rather open-ended regarding Duke and the fragments of himself that either create the monster or the helping hands, since nothing is fully explained. How much of it was just Duke and how much of it was just real, since Paul could see all of them as well. Then the question of does the Crooked Man take the appearance of his former victims to terrorize new ones comes into play, since we find out in the hospital that Duke wasn't the first to be hunted. I don't know, between that and a couple of the foreshadowing bits, like the abandonment posters in relation to Fluffy, everything gets tied up in a nice red bow. I feel like if the chance ever arose for a remake, then it would benefit from detailing the environments a bit more, but retaining the old art style as well in order to keep that retro feeling it carries, but perhaps polishing off a couple things like animations, whether it be as a pixel sprites or the thrown up artwork. A rework would also allow for better music to be implemented in and continue to build a brooding atmosphere with adequate sound effects to match, gone with the screeching sound of the monster, and a more unnerving and balanced one can be put in its place instead, so that the people are scared instead of being fed up. Otherwise, the characters need a little revision, as their designs are both ordinary but unique enough to pick apart if put in a lineup. There doesn't need to be some outrageous hairstyle or flashy colours, since that would ultimately clash with the setting trying to be established. To conclude, I implore you to experience the whole Strange Man series if you haven't before, since The Crooked Man is a prime example of what they can achieve as a start. I intend to play the other games as well, though I may make a review if I get blasted away like with this installment, but who knows, they have a lot to live up to. There could be a couple of commentary videos sprinkled in first, before I decide to delve into it again. Until then, I've been VSM, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully.